Before the sun rises, Abraham places bread and water on Hagar's back and points to the desert without saying a word. Ishmael, his firstborn, walks in silence, not knowing that that would be his last look at his father. The water runs out, hope dies, and the mother casts the son under a bush so as not to see him die. But at that exact moment, the heavens incline, God hears the weeping, and reveals that the well was always there. Before we begin, write in the comments where you are watching from. Leave your like, subscribe to the channel, and activate the bell. We continue. Abraham wakes before the sun rises. He takes bread, he fills a skin of water, he places everything on Hagar's shoulders, the same woman he has known for more than 15 years, the mother of his firstborn. Beside her, an adolescent of approximately 17 years observes the father in silence. Ishmael does not know he is seeing Abraham for the last time, and Abraham cannot look into the son's eyes while pointing to the desert of Beersheba. The text of Genesis 21 is surgical in the description. It records no embrace, it records no blessing. It records not a single word from Abraham to the son he raised since birth. Only this: he rose early in the morning, prepared minimal provisions, put them on the mother's back, and sent the two away. The man who had negotiated with God to try to save Sodom, descending from 50 righteous men to 45, then 40, 30, 20, until reaching 10, does not negotiate a single time for his own son. Absolute silence. To understand the weight of this scene, you need to go back almost 2 decades. Abraham was 75 years old when he left Haran, obeying a divine order that promised offspring numerous as the stars of the sky. 10 years passed in Canaan, no son. Sarah, his wife, had already surpassed 80 years. The body no longer responded. The promise seemed biologically impossible. It was then that Sarah made a decision common for the era, but devastating for all involved. She offered her Egyptian servant, Hagar, as a sort of surrogate womb of antiquity. The Code of Hammurabi, which governed customs of that period, provided for exactly this arrangement. A barren wife could give her slave to the husband, and the son born would be legally considered the couple's heir. Abraham accepted, Hagar conceived, and the domestic hell began. Genesis 16 describes the change. When Hagar realized she was pregnant, she began to look at Sarah with contempt. The slave who carried the heir now felt superior to the barren mistress. Sarah, wounded in pride and heart, reacted with violence. She afflicted Hagar with such intensity that the Egyptian fled to the desert, pregnant, alone, preferring to risk death than to continue in that house. It was there, near a spring on the way to Shur, that something extraordinary happened. An angel found Hagar in the desert. Not a human servant of Abraham sent to fetch her, a celestial messenger. And the first thing this angel did was call her by name and condition, Hagar, maid of Sarai. He knew who she was, he knew where she came from, he knew what she had suffered. The order was difficult: return and submit yourself to your mistress. But along with the order came a promise that no slave of the ancient world had ever received. The angel said that Hagar's offspring would be so numerous that they could not be counted. He said she would have a son, and should call him Ishmael, which means God hears. He said that God had heard her affliction. A fugitive slave, pregnant, abandoned in the desert, received a promise of national dimensions directly from heaven. Hagar returned. Ishmael was born when Abraham was 86 years old. For 13 whole years he was the only son, the firstborn, the heir. The boy Abraham taught to ride camels, to tend flocks, to recognize stars in the night sky. 13 years of daily coexistence. 13 years of an aged father investing everything he knew in the only son he had. 13 years building memories, bond, love. 13 years. Then God appeared again. Abraham was already 99 years old, the body bent by the weight of almost a century of life. And the message was clear. Sarah, his wife, would have a son, not Hagar, Sarah. The original promise would be fulfilled through her. The boy's name would be Isaac, and the eternal covenant, the covenant that would define the people of God, would pass through Isaac, not through Ishmael. Abraham's reaction is recorded in Genesis 17. He fell upon his face and laughed. Then he said to God aloud, "Oh, that Ishmael might live before thee." Translating, "God, I already have a son. I love this boy. Let the promise pass through him, please." The divine answer was twofold. Yes, the covenant would pass through Isaac, who would be born a year from then. But no, Ishmael would not be forgotten. God promised to bless him, make him fruitful, multiply him extraordinarily. 12 princes would be born of him. A great nation would be formed from his blood. 2 promises. 2 sons, 2 nations. Isaac was born when Abraham completed 100 years. Sarah was 90. The biological miracle that seemed impossible materialized in a baby crying in the tent of a woman who was already a great-grandmother by age. The laughter of incredulity that Sarah had given when she heard the promise turned into the laughter of joy that gave the boy his name. Isaac means he laughs. But while one mother laughed, another watched in silence. Hagar saw her son lose the position of sole heir. Ishmael, who for 13 years had been the center of Abraham's attention, now shared space with a newborn whom everyone treated as a miracle. The adolescent of approximately 15 years watched the father run to the brother's cradle while he stayed behind. He watched the celebrations that had never been held for him. He watched the joy that seemed to exclude him. More time passed. Isaac was weaned, which in ancient culture happened around 2 or 3 years of age. Abraham held a great feast to celebrate this milestone. Everyone was present, and it was on that day that everything crumbled. Genesis 21 verse 9 records that Sarah saw Hagar's son mocking. The Hebrew word used is ambiguous. It can mean laughing, playing, or mocking in a hostile way. Some scholars suggest that Ishmael, now about 17 years old, was imitating little Isaac in a mocking way. Others interpret it as normal older brother play. The text does not clarify. What Sarah felt, however, is clear. She went to Abraham with a brutal demand. "Cast out this bondwoman and her son, for the son of this bondwoman shall not be heir with my son, even with Isaac." Not Hagar's son, not Ishmael. The son of this bondwoman. Sarah refused to pronounce the boy's name. She dehumanized him with words before expelling him with hands. The text says that these words were very grievous in Abraham's eyes because of his son, not because of Hagar, because of the son. Abraham loved that adolescent. He had spent 17 years raising him, and now the wife demanded that he send his firstborn away into the desert with nothing but bread and water. Abraham did not sleep that night, and it was during the darkness that God spoke. The message was direct. Do everything Sarah says, not because Sarah is right, not because Ishmael deserves it, but because the promised seed would be called in Isaac, and because God personally would take care of Hagar's son. Of the son of the bondwoman will I make a nation, because he is thy seed. Can you imagine what Abraham felt at that moment? God was asking him to trust absolutely, to hand over the son without visible guarantee, to believe that the same God who appeared to Hagar in the desert years ago would appear again. It was a preview of what would come later on Mount Moriah with Isaac, but this Abraham did not yet know. Then came the dawn. Abraham rose early in the morning. He took bread and a skin of water. The goatskin typical of the era carried between 10 and 20 liters, enough for a day, perhaps 2 at most, under the sun of the Negev desert. He put everything on Hagar's shoulders. He handed over the boy, and he sent them away. The Hebrew verb used for send away is the same used when someone sends away definitively. It is not a temporary trip. It is a sending without return. Abraham was cutting the physical bond with the son forever, and he did it in silence, without a farewell speech, without a final blessing, without explanation for the adolescent who probably did not understand why the father was abandoning him. Hagar walked. She wandered through the desert of Beersheba. The Hebrew word for wander suggests she had no certain direction. She was lost, roaming. The sun of the Negev in summer easily exceeds 40 degrees. The evaporation of water from a human body in exertion under these conditions reaches 1 liter per hour. The skin that Abraham provided had no chance of lasting. The water ran out. The text does not say how long it took, perhaps a day, perhaps two. But the moment arrived when Hagar looked at the skin, turned it upside down, and not a drop fell. She looked at the 17-year-old son, who was probably too weak to continue walking, and she made a decision that reveals the size of the despair. She put the boy under a bush. The Hebrew word suggests that Hagar literally threw or cast Ishmael there. It was not a delicate gesture. It was the movement of a mother who has no more strength to carry, to drag, to keep standing. She deposited the adolescent in the scarce shade of a desert bush and moved away. The distance Hagar walked is specific in the text, the range of a bowshot. At the time, a skilled archer could launch an arrow approximately 150 to 200 meters. Hagar put this space between her and the sun, close enough to see what would happen, far enough not to hear the last breaths. And then she said, aloud to no one, "Let me not see the death of the child." She sat down, lifted up her voice, and wept. The text of Genesis records Hagar's weeping, but the following verse changes the focus surprisingly. It says that God heard the voice of the lad, not Hagar's, the lad's, Ishmael, thrown under the bush on the verge of death by dehydration, was also weeping, or groaning, or perhaps praying. The text does not specify what came out of his mouth. It only says that God heard. That name, given 17 years before in the desert of Shur, now made complete sense. Ishmael, God hears. And God was hearing exactly at that moment. An angel called from heaven. He called Hagar by name and asked a question that was not a question. It was a declaration of care. "What aileth thee, Hagar?" God knew what she had. He knew of the thirst, the despair, the certainty of death, but he wanted her to know that he was seeing. The order was double. First, arise. Second, lift up the lad and hold him in thine hand. The God who heard the weeping now commanded the mother to lift the son. He did not send rain. He did not make manna fall. He did not send ravens with food. He commanded Hagar to act, to rise, to fetch, to hold, and then God opened her eyes. The text does not say that God created a well. It says that God opened Hagar's eyes, and she saw a well of water. The well was already there. Salvation was meters away the whole time. But Hagar, blinded by despair, by exhaustion, by the certainty of death, could not see. God did not change the landscape. He changed her vision. She went, filled the skin, gave the lad drink. 7 words in Portuguese. Less than 3 seconds to read, but it represents the difference between death and life, between end and new beginning, between desert and nation. Ishmael survived. The text of Genesis 21 accelerates from here. It says that God was with the lad, and he grew. He dwelt in the wilderness of Paran, a vast region that extends for thousands of square kilometers between the Negev and the Sinai Peninsula. He became an archer. His mother, the Egyptian who never forgot her origins, provided a wife from Egypt for him. The life continued. Ishmael had sons, many sons. Genesis 25 lists 12 names: Nebajoth, Kedar, Adbeel, Mibsam, Mishma, Duma, Massa, Hadad, Tema, Jetur, Naphish, and Kedemah. 12 princes, exactly as God had promised Abraham 20 years before. Each became leader of his own clan. Whole tribes descended from that adolescent who one day was thrown under a bush to die. The promised nation materialized. The descendants of Ishmael spread over a region that went from Havilah unto Shur, territory that corresponds approximately to the north of present-day Arabia. They became known as skilled spice merchants, controlling routes that crossed entire deserts. Some of the tribes specialized in camel breeding, the same animals that centuries later would carry the wise men from the east to Bethlehem. Others mastered the art of metallurgy, forging weapons and tools that were traded throughout the Middle East. Ishmael lived 137 years. It is a number that goes unnoticed by those who read. Fast, but think of the extent of this existence. Born as the son of a slave, expelled from home at 17, almost died of thirst in the desert, and yet lived 13 more decades, saw sons born, then grandsons, then great-grandsons, saw his offspring multiply as had been promised before he was even born, saw the angel's promise in the desert of Shur fulfilled before his eyes. But perhaps the most significant moment of Ishmael's adult life appears almost hidden in the text. Genesis 25, verse 9. Abraham dies at 175 years, and the text says that Isaac and Ishmael his sons buried him in the cave of Machpelah. The two together, the son of the promise and the son of the slave, the heir of the covenant and the expelled from the camp, side by side, carrying the body of the father both loved, toward the tomb Abraham had bought decades before to bury Sarah. We do not know how this reunion happened. We do not know if there was a messenger notifying Ishmael of the father's death. We do not know if the brothers had seen each other at any moment during the years of separation. The text records no conversations, reconciliations, embraces. It only records that when the time came to bury Abraham, the two sons were there, together. The desert of Beersheba was left behind. The thirst, the silent farewell, the bush, the empty skin, all this was absorbed by the decades that followed. And in the end, the two brothers, whom life separated so brutally, met before the tomb of the man who begot them. Isaac, who was almost sacrificed on Moriah, Ishmael, who almost died in the Negev, both carrying invisible marks of moments when Abraham had to choose obedience instead of paternal instinct. Ishmael's legacy did not end at that funeral. Centuries later, his descendants would cross biblical history at crucial moments. It was Ishmaelite merchants who bought Joseph from his brothers and took him to Egypt, the same Egypt from where Hagar had come. It was a princess with Ishmaelite blood, through Kedar, who became Solomon's wife. Whole tribes of Ishmaelites appear in battle records during the period of the judges and kings of Israel. Two nations were born of Abraham, two lineages spread across the ancient world, and until today, millions of people in the Middle East trace their ancestry to that boy who received a name before being born. Ishmael, God hears. The name that seemed ironic when he agonized in the desert proved true at the exact moment when everything seemed lost. God heard the weeping. God opened Hagar's eyes. God showed the well that was already there. Ishmael did not die in that desert. He grew, became an archer, married an Egyptian chosen by his own mother, and begot 12 princes, exactly as God had promised Abraham. When the patriarch died, at 175 years, it was Ishmael who appeared beside Isaac to bury him in the cave of Machpelah. Two brothers whom life separated, reunited before the tomb of the father who loved both, each in his own way. The desert of Beersheba was not the end of the story. It was the place where God proved that he hears even the weeping the mother tries to hide, that he sees the boy thrown under the bush, that he opens wells where only sand existed. Ishmael lived 137 years. His name crossed generations, and until today, millions of people in the Middle East trace their origin to that adolescent who one day was left behind, but was never forgotten by God.